One of the major obstacles of Africa's economic development is lack of financial resource. Although African countries have possessed abundant natural resources, strong workforce, and government committed to utilize these assets, financial limitations remain Africa's significant, huge challenge. To address this critical gap, African governments, business people, private sector entities, and others have established Pan-African financial institutions called African Export-Import Bank, or Afreximbank in short. Today, we will explore how this important Pan-African bank is operating. My guest for today is Eric Monchu Intong, Group Managing Director for Client Relation Management for Africa and the Caribbean. Eric Monchu, very warm welcome to Ethiopian News Agency. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. So for those who are not familiar with Afreximbank, can you give us a brief introduction of Afreximbank and how it operates?
Yeah, thank you very much. Afreximbank is a multilateral development financial institution that was set up in 1993, more precisely on the 8th of May 1993 by African states. Afreximbank was set up as a child of necessity because its creation was orchestrated by the debt crisis that started from Latin America in the 80s. So when that happened, the devastating effects, economic effects on the continent of Africa necessitated the creation of a dedicated trade finance bank that gave birth to Afreximbank in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, as I said earlier, on the 8th of May 1993. And the ownership of Afreximbank is, again, an epitome of a PPP, where Class A shareholders are African states, and today we have 53 member countries, African countries who are member states of Afreximbank, and these member states become member state by signing the establishment agreement and ratifying it, thereby promulgating it into law so that it gives the bank the preferred creditor status backed by the law of the country. Class B shareholders are African private sectors. We have entities like the Dangote Group, a lot of the commercial banks in Nigeria, in South Africa, and some of them here in Ethiopia. All of them belong to Class B. So if you look at classes A and B put together, Class A is public sector, member states represented either by their ministries of finance or the central banks, and Class B being the private sector. That's why I said at the beginning, Afreximbank is an epitome of a public-private partnership. We now have Class C, which is open now to other international institutions like the China Exim Bank, like Citibank, like Standard Chartered Bank, HSBC, India Exim Bank, Russia Export Center. All of these are Class C's, international institutions. Class D is listed on the Mauritius Stock Exchange and is fully subscribed to, now open to the rest of the shareholders. The bank was created with a mandate to promote, facilitate, and finance intra and extra-African trade. Because at the time of the crisis of the 80s that led to the creation of the bank, there was no bank like African Export-Import Bank. So African heads of states then commissioned the African Development Bank president at that time, the late Dr. Babacar Ndiaye, who commissioned a market and feasibility study that then led to the creation of Afreximbank. So that in moment of crisis, in moment of difficulties, there will be an African-owned development financial institution that will stand by African states, support the public sector, support the private sector, support the SMEs, who are, by the way, account for 70 to 80% of employment in our continent. So you see, this is the bank we have in front of you.
Mm-hmm. The major objective of Afreximbank is to promote intra-extra-Africa trade. Of course, Afreximbank is also supporting major development projects across Africa. So I think this Pan-African financial institution, Afreximbank, is very much aligned with African Continental Free Trade Area objectives. So how Afreximbank is supporting and working with African Continental Free Trade Area for the full realization of this ambitious project African Continental Free Trade Area, which sought to unite African market?
Thank you very much. That's a great question, actually. If you recall, I highlighted that the mandate of Afreximbank is to promote, facilitate, and finance intra. I underline intra.
Between and among African nations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then extra-African trade. So the support and the work Afreximbank is doing with the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is enshrined in our mandate. It's like if you look at the AFCA Secretariat and look at Afreximbank, they are like two sides of the same coin. That's why Afreximbank is the accredited technical partner which is working with the AFCA Secretariat in Accra, Ghana, to set up, to make sure that the implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is hitch-free. What are we doing as Afreximbank? We are helping in providing grant support for the harmonization of standards. We've harmonized standards in the textile sector, in the automotive sectors, and we are now going to start with the petroleum product sectors, so that products that will be traded across the continent will be of the same quality. Today, if you see the petroleum products that are being imported outside the continent, the requirements in Ethiopia are different from the requirements in Nigeria, different from the requirements in Cameroon or other African countries. So those standards need to be harmonized so that if you're buying the product from Ethiopia, you'll be like the same product that is being sold in Cameroon or in Nigeria or in Tanzania and so on. So we are, aside having staff on secondment to the AFCA Secretariat in Accra, Ghana, we are actually providing technical support as well as grant support to ensure the implementation of the AFCA is hitch-free. To round up this point, you will recall that AFCA was signed in March 2018, and it entered into force in 2021. Afreximbank played a pivotal role to ensure that African countries signed up to this agreement. For us, it's the biggest opportunity that the continent has. And because it's part of the DNA of Afreximbank, that's why it's part of our current strategic plan, which is hinged on 4 pillars: intra-African trade and the implementation of the AFCFTA. That's pillar number 1. It's actually the arrowhead of our current strategic plan, which is running from 2022 to 2026. Pillar number 2 is industrialization and export development. This closely supports intra-African trade, because for us to trade among ourselves as African countries and between Africa and Africans in the diaspora, like Africans and the Caribbean, we need to manufacture the goods and services that need to be traded. That's why we need to be industrialized. We need to produce things locally, add value, and export to other African countries. And the third pillar is leadership in global trade banking in Africa, support the financial institutions through LC confirmation lines, through short-term loans, medium-term loans, and long-term loans, so that together we can partner with the financial sector of all our member countries to ensure that the financing is available for intra-African trade to thrive.
Mm-hmm. Recently, African governments are advocating for major reforms in international financial institutions, such as in World Bank and IMF, International Monetary Fund. Why they are saying this is they believe that these international financial institutions are not addressing the demands of African nations. What's your view on this, and do you think this is essential?
I think, again, another good question. I think it's a good point to relook at the way we partner with the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, and the African multilaterals. Over the years, like I said, Afreximbank creation 32 years ago has also led to the creation of other African development multilateral financial institutions like AFCA, like Africa Ray, RTD. We have quite a number of them. Sheta Afrique Development Bank, and so on. All of them having specific but complementary mandates. What does that mean? The African states create these DFIs, African Development Financial Institutions, and gives them preferred creditor status through ratification of their treaty that creates them and promulgation of those treaties into law. So that means that preferred creditor status allows those DFIs, African DFIs, to take more risk, because in an event of a wind-up, a preferred creditor will be repaid first. In our mandate, if I take the case of Afreximbank, in our mandate, our loans are not subject to restructuring. Our loans are not subject to haircuts. Our loans are supposed to be structured in line with the business case, because we're set up to operate as a commercially viable development financial institution. What we see today is the definition where some institutions are saying, because African multilaterals sometimes don't provide concessionary financing, that means that they do not qualify as those entities that have preferred creditor status, which is not correct. Because if my treaty, as Afreximbank treaty, has been signed by Ethiopia, ratified, gazetted, and promulgated into law, if you now subject us to go against that law, it means that you're pushing us to break the law. Neither the Ethiopians nor Afreximbank cannot willingly break the law. That is why they call for a relook at the global financial architecture is a timely call, so that we can find complementary ways of partnering with the likes of the Paris Club and China in a way that recognizes the preferred creditor status granted by African states to African multilateral financial institutions.
Let's talk about global credit rating agencies. Recently African governments are facing a huge challenge, significant challenge in securing loans, and that's largely due to the low credit rates assigned by global credit rating agencies. And these agencies are criticized for their biased view on the investment potentials of the continent, and they rely heavily, on the perceptions rather than the actual investment potential of Africa. So what's your view on this? Do you think Africa needs to have its own credit rating agencies?
Yeah, I think from the perspective of Afreximbank, we are rated, by the way, by the international credit rating agencies, Moody's, Fitch, JCR, and the Chinese rating agency. By the way, we have a very fantastic relationship with the international credit ratings. But the reason why Afreximbank started using GCR is a South African-based rating agency. Before we started using it, we recognized the fact that Africans need to have their own rating agency. And if you look at the case of Afreximbank, GCR rates Afreximbank A with a stable outlook. Moody's rates Afreximbank BAA1 with a stable outlook. Fitch rates Afreximbank BBB, and JCR, which is the Japanese rating agency, rates Afreximbank an A-, and the Chinese rating agency rates Afreximbank with a AAA. And for us to raise money in each of these markets, if we are, for instance, issuing a Eurobond, we'll use our Moody's rating or our Fitch rating. If we are going to raise money in Africa, we use GCR, though we note that GCR has now been bought over by Moody's. If we want to raise money in Japan, we have to be rated by the Japanese rating agency, JCR. And recently, we raised money as well, not only Japan, where we issued a samurai bond, we also raised money in China, where we issued a panda bond, and we're rated by the Chinese rating agency. So you are right to say, if someone wants to raise money, and investors are African investors, we need a credible rating agency, African rating agency, that can give the rating that will instill confidence for investors to be able to invest in the instrument or the debt raising of that entity. As I said at the beginning, we thought GCR is an African rating agency, and that's why we've used them consistently, at least as far as I can remember, over at least the past 6 years. Today, the African Union is pushing for African rating agency. We look at it as a welcome idea because we need to start giving confidence to African investors. It's just like when I go to the Eurobond market to share bond, they'll look at my Fitch rating, and then investors will be able to price my risk appropriately, commensurate to the rating that we have. So it's a good idea for each continent. You see, you can't raise money in Japan if the Japanese rating agency doesn't rate you. So it should be the case with Africa. I think so.
Several African countries are undergoing a series of macroeconomic reforms. How Afreximbank is supporting such reforms in the continent?
This is another great question. And by the way, we are at home here where we've seen tremendous and fantastic reforms that the leadership under His Excellency Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has demonstrated. In fact, when you land in Addis, you see the transformation is mind-blowing. Now, these reforms come to provide the enabling environment for a thriving private sector, which is the quintessential reason why we are having the roadshow in Addis Ababa today and tomorrow, to engage with the public sector players and stakeholders, to engage with the private sectors, commercial banks, managing directors of all the commercial banks, the president of CBE, the governor and deputy governors of National Bank of Ethiopia, small and medium-sized enterprises, to understand that now that the economy is strongly restructured and reformed, what are the pain points that we need to address collectively by crafting financing solutions that will be able to allow them to take advantage of the opportunity thrown up by these massive and successful reforms, and also those opportunities that are thrown up by the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. So we've been going around, and Ethiopia, we are here now to ensure that we understand the needs of the potential borrowers, potential partners, and provide financing solutions so that, like you said at the beginning, one of the biggest problems we have is lack of financing. We are coming to them, to the stakeholders, so that we can provide those solutions. And this is what we've been doing across the continent to support those macroeconomic reforms. You will note that Nigeria, at the beginning of the government, when he took over, His Excellency President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, also started with very drastic reforms. We are always there to work with them, work with the government, work with the private sector, and work with the agencies, state-owned enterprises, to see how we can support by finance. And we've been doing well. So far, so good. Even when it was difficult, we worked with the National Bank of Ethiopia and the Commercial Bank of Ethiopia, the various commercial banks, to provide trade confirmation financing solutions that allow for the importation of pharmaceutical products, allow for the importation of refined petroleum products, other strategic commodities. And this has been going on a revolving basis, not less than $2 billion. With this new reform, we think that a big economy like Ethiopia, we should be aiming to grow the support that Afreximbank brings to the economy between 2 to 4 to even 5 billion in the next 3 to 5 years.
Of course, you have been touching upon the points, the positive outcomes of Ethiopia's macroeconomic reforms. Like many African countries, Ethiopia is also going through a series of macroeconomic reforms, and the major objective of which is to transform Ethiopia's economy to a private sector-led investment model.
Yeah.
How Afreximbank is supporting this?
Exactly. So as I started on it earlier on, the roadshow is meant for us to relate with stakeholders. If you take the financial sector, Up to now, we'll be providing LC confirmation limits to facilitate importation of strategic products like petroleum products, fertilizers and pharmaceutical products, and what have you. But in other markets across the continent, we provide pre-export financing, post-shipment financing, short-term loans, structured trade finance, medium-term loans, and long-term loans to financial institutions. We have not yet done that here because we're waiting for this moment. Now, we're engaging with banks. We'll not only be confirming their letter of credit, we can actually give them loans so that they can provide the liquidity that the SMEs they are supporting need so that they'll continue to grow their businesses. That's one. The corporate themselves can approach Afreximbank directly. We will work with them along with their financial institutions, noting that Afreximbank comes to complement what financial institutions are doing. We do not compete with financial institutions. That is why for us to lend to a government or to a corporate, we must have a financial institution or one or two financial institutions being involved so that we are not seen as displacing the financial institutions. Because we work with and through them. That's why we're also engaging with corporates. We had a very fantastic meeting with the Chief Executive Officer of the Ethiopian Railway Corporation, where we're discussing various transactions that we're going to consider to unlock the trade corridors, the 8 different trade corridors and dry port, which are trade-enabling infrastructure that will allow the movement of goods and expand trade. Ethiopia, being the capital of Africa, needs to position itself not just to take advantage of the huge natural resources, be human and those underground, but also as a key leader in the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. That's why the financing that needs to come now has to complement what we've done up to now. Then you'll be able to see the full benefits of the reforms that the government have put in place. Yeah. And the capacity, just to finish up, the capacity is expandable. We can scale because Afreximbank is a leader in syndication. So if we have a huge chunk or a ticket size of a facility or transaction that we want to do and is huge, we'll bring in other lenders to join us. And we think that I'm very positive that we're going to be seeing massive support to the Ethiopian business community and the government and the public sector as well.
Quite critical and insightful views of the development potential of Africa. Thank you very much. Eric Monchu, Group Managing Director for Client Relation Management for Africa and the Caribbean. Really thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and perspectives here in our show.
Thank you very much.
That was my brief interview where I explore the activities of Afreximbank, Pan-African financial institutions running in Africa. Many thanks for watching. See you then.